Hello, everyone. I'm Yvonne Gamble, co-founder of Women Leading Change Now. And I want to thank you for joining us here at the United Nations Conference on the Status of Women. This is our 65th convening here in 2021. And we are talking with several women from across the United States and around the world on different issues as they relate to the status of women in the workplace, in the home, as they relate to them, just in life in general. Some are entrepreneurs, some are actually corporate workers, and some are out here as activists. We're going to talk to a woman today, Andronika Dorsey. And Andronika, we call her Nikki, as so passionately, and she is just a wonderful woman. And she's going to come here and talk to us about human resources and some of the different relational issues that some may have faced with human resources. And as we know, this is one of the issues that's actually going on right now. And if you are tuning into this broadcast here during the month of March, you may well have seen just recently Oprah Winfrey did a convening with the Duchess of Sussex and Prince Harry, and they talked about how they were marginalized as royals, and the different things that they went through. And Meghan Markle, she went to the actual firm, which is a corporation, and she asked for help to their human resources department regarding an issue that she was facing with mental health, and saying that she needed help, and she was refused, as well as other systemic type racism things were actually brought on and spoke to her. So we're going to talk with Nikki Dorsey, and we will touch point on, some of these different types of issues and how you might, as women, handle some of these things if you find yourself in some of these different touch point situations. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring Nikki up. I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about her background and how she comes to us. She's a definitely well-rounded young woman. Nikki, thank you so much for joining us here today. And if you would share for us, we're broadcasting from the United Nations in New York, which is in the United States, and we're broadcasting throughout the world. So let the women know just who is Nikki Dorsey, and where do you hail from?
Well, thank you for having me on board. I mean, it's an awesome opportunity and honor to be able to speak on women's behalf. I'm originally from Chicago. I moved here to the Peach State, Georgia. I have a background in, it seems like many lifetimes, initially starting out in admin type work, and then working in HR, working in military and government contracting, doing a little bit of construction, and also currently fitness. So I have a wild array of specialties, as it were, but HR is my specialty and the one that I actually like working in the most.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, in that industry that you kind of carved out for yourself, what is it like for women, working in human resources?
Well, what we find is that we actually have a good amount in terms of the gender mix with that. What we also find is that some of that is, I want to say, catered to our ability to better relate in terms of diplomacy and tactfulness when we have to deal with others. So we do have men in the industry, but we'll typically see a lot of women in those middle management roles, or in roles where we have to do that direct interaction. So it is good to be in terms of that part, because you don't see a lot of difficulty in terms of getting in the middle range and getting on that lower range. And sometimes you might see a little bit of disparity when you get towards the higher in terms of actual directors and things of that nature, but it doesn't happen often.
Well, That's interesting. That I hear that from several different industries, across several different industries. It seems to be a thread that run through that. At your administrative and then your middle management level, maybe up to director, uh, these corporations, what have you, are have no problem whatsoever bringing women on
Right.
into these positions. But when it comes into the overall, running, say, of the entire department, or that control of how that whole entire department runs, it tends to seem to now all of a sudden you turn to men. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, where are these men coming from? Because, most people would think that you start, on the lower levels at the bottom and you rise up to the top, in a field, especially after you've been there, for a number of years.
Right.
So, can you kind of speak to that? I mean, how is it that all of a sudden they were, you have all these women, and then all of a sudden the one who's in charge is the man or men?
Yeah. So what I saw is, in terms of the trend is, again, with women tending to be caregivers and the gender that tends to be a nurturer in those cases, it seems to be easier to have those roles relegated to them. But when you get to the directors, there's still some bias about, you want to get things done, or you want to make sure no one has their emotions in the way, and that's not always the case. I did have the great opportunity to sit under a director that was a female, and watched her take charge and do some things, and was very much awed that, okay, wait a minute, the guy doesn't have to run the stuff the woman can. So, it's a good thing. At the same time, I realized that because of her personality, she did have to exhibit a certain amount of strength, demeanor, and presence that a lot of the men who were her peer or higher even were a little uncomfortable with. You could visibly tell that they were not sure how to handle a woman of that strength and that person, in terms of her having a personality that says, no, this is not how it's gonna go. So there's still some discomfort with the idea that there are women that can take on that role and still project that ability to perform professionally, still put the emotions aside. And that is unnerving for a lot of gentlemen, because they don't know how to do either. Men in the general in that particular industry tend to think you have to be a robot, you have to be a really nice person. They rarely have someone that balances both well, and they tend to be a bit intimidated by that. Again, I mean, not to try to be funny, but it was hilarious to watch the interactions of somebody with a psychology background, the higher ups they had to deal with it. So it's there.
Okay, that's interesting. That's an interesting take on that. But I definitely kind of I'm getting a better understanding of what you're saying, and how that it's going. Is that everyone? So basically, men and women, were somewhat surprised or somewhat wowed that she could take on that position. It probably would it be fair to say that the assessment is, how a woman has, say, a nicer, a more quiet resolve about herself or what have you, and now when you have to step into a role of sternness and strictness and matter of factness, then that's when it's kind of like, oh, I didn't know, oh, you're not being a woman or something.
So something like that, and that they were, again, not expecting that to be the case. I mean, honestly, if I were to have described her, I would say she probably is the best poker player ever. She was very hard to read from a standpoint where they couldn't anticipate what she would do, and sometimes we couldn't even anticipate what she'd do. But again, I found her to be very fair. I found her to be very professional, and I found her to be able to definitely hand out what needed to be done. In addition to, she spent the time to make sure that she went to meetings and all of the outside agendas that were there, in terms of if they had a meeting that might effectively, deal with HR issues later, then she was there. She was there at every meeting. She was there giving her opinion, making it clear that we have concerns and we need to be able to address it. One of the things that she was able to do during her tenure there, she's still there, is she was one of the people instrumental in giving them to extend the bereavement leave for our staff. It was literally restricted to only siblings and only immediate family, like parents and things. So through her advocacy, as well as the others, they were able to get that extended to brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, mothers-in-law, things like that, where that had not been the case. And no one had ever addressed it. She said, why are we not addressing this? I mean, we actually have people who like their in-laws. We can't sit there.
Right, exactly.
The time to grieve appropriately.
Yeah.
So I found her to have taken that authority and not just used it to do her job, but to use it to really benefit others. That was some of the things that I appreciated about her being a woman in charge. She understood that. She could see that and not make it seem as if it was being nicey nice. Look, this is something we have to do for our people. So again, the higher ups there, she's like I said, she's still in place. She's still running stuff. They just were not knowing how to deal with someone who knew how to handle the logic and balance that with we got to look out for our people.
Right, exactly. Because those, that's truly that is a testament, to her ability and to where she struck that balance.
Yes.
And that's where there's balance, right in there. To where it was not just simply I, myself, but she extended that to all. Yes. So yes, that's an excellent testament. I'm sure she's very proud of you, for speaking up and speaking out, on her behalf, with that. So I applaud you for doing that. And that kind of leads me into, another area. I want to go a little bit deeper, into this area. And that is, how easy is it to access for yourself, in this particular field? How easy of access is it to get into that industry? And for even, and if you would, we have a lot of women out here who are listening, and a lot of them are entrepreneurs. They run their own businesses. And I think sometimes we can get the entrepreneurs, and especially solopreneurs or the smaller businesses, what have you, they get so inundated, obviously, in running a business, marketing, developing and growing and that sort of thing, that sometimes they may not look very carefully at the human resources or the human capital factor. So if you could, throw some little nuggets out there for them, I'd appreciate it.
Not a problem. One of it's not difficult to get in. What you want to do is just to find an area where it helps if you find an area you work in or that has a mission that you believe in. When I initially got into HR, it was kind of by accident. I went in to become what was a junior secretary back then and got promoted. And when I got promoted, that position actually gave me responsibility dealing with HR. So I became responsible for setting up the insurance enrollment meetings and things like that. So that's why I kind of fell in love with it. So I would say to get into it is to just find yourself in a place where you really are, determined to be of assistance. In that particular case, I was working for a nonprofit. Actually, I'm not gonna name them, but it was a very popular nonprofit that's here in Atlanta. And I was very much into the mission. So working for them was great. And so then when I got promoted, I felt like I had to get them the best service they could possibly get in terms of dealing with HR, making sure our people are happy, because they're happy employees. They're going to do a great job for service for our people in this nonprofit. So just finding that area that you really believe in doing that kind of a service. And even if it starts out as admin, if you're showing that interest, kind of show yourselves to those HR people and let them know, or begin to talk to them and find out that, and you will find that as things open up, you may be called in to do those things because they see that you have a genuine interest. And then if they know that you've got a good work ethic, that's the main thing, is to be able to know that if we give you these things, that these things are going to be handled, that our people are going to get on. If you're doing onboarding, that it's going to be done properly, things like that nature. And of course, having a demeanor where you seem to want to speak to people. in terms of the entrepreneurial part, what I would suggest is those who haven't thought about it, if you have anything where you deal with a lot of admin, take on those responsibilities of learning how those things work. Because as we're getting into a new normal, these are things that are going to come up because as we're finding out, we're not going to be able to do business as normal. What I found is a lot of have learned to become HR consultants. And whereas that may or may not have been okay, I'm going to tell you, I did my internship after I got my master's with a HR person, a firm, private, one female entrepreneur that specialized in change management. Oh. And so I was kind of like, is this really a deal? So when I went to go work for her, I sat in some meetings and saw how they did things. I mean, these corporations are willing to pay large amounts of money to know how to get the services they need. And in her case, she was basically hand-holding them into the process of establishing change in their actual businesses, because what was happening was they would implement new policies and things like that, and they were losing morale. And so her specialty was being able to come in, show you how to implement the change, show you how to kind of massage it into the system and get people to get on board and not shock them and throw them into the mix of stuff. And so she actually wrote a book since then regarding that. I was one of the people that got to edit it because I just got my master's. But so there is definitely opportunity. That change management, she is sought after. I came to work for her and I was like, okay, I'm an intern. My internship had me going to the Buckhead 05 building. This woman rented out the penthouse. So obviously it is lucrative. So I mean, so that's something to look into. Areas where we know things are about to happen because we're in the pandemic. Again, she was ahead of the ball talking about change management. That's what we're dealing with now. Dealing with industries we're dealing with changes in gender. Those are things you need to be well versed in, because people now need to understand how this works when you're talking about ADA, discrimination, all of that. Get yourself very well versed because that's coming into play when people get sick, things of that nature. These hot topics, become well versed in them, well versed enough in that whatever else you're doing, you can now add that to your repertoire. And then in many cases, the HR piece that you want, a lot of times it's just certification. You're not going back to get a whole new degree. Sometimes you're just going in to a college or a business school, like from state, taking a class, getting the application to say that you are knowledgeable in this thing, your repertoire. As I was told by my mentor months ago, get as much alphabet soup and use that as your leverage to get into consulting. So that's where you want to become an entrepreneur in the HR business.
Okay. Well, that's excellent. Thank you. Those are some excellent nuggets, and I like what you said, diversify your portfolio, especially as an entrepreneur, and really be able to, get in and learn, who the people are that you currently have, and learn about the people that you may want to have, so that you can pick and select the best people, to help you get your job done with what you're doing. So that's excellent. I love that. Thank you so much for that, Nikki. And now we're going to, of course, we cannot get away from the elephant in the room here. Here, this is 2021, but 2020 came in roaring. So I'm pretty sure this, we thought the 1920s was roaring pretty good, but 2020 has taken on a whole new life of its own.
Yes, it has.
So with this pandemic and beyond, and now that we are well entrenched at home, telecommuting is, that's the norm. Remote has become the norm. How is the HR department handling these things? And, what is that going to do, with the economic growth? I mean, now you've got, it's not just, what are the HR people doing? They're sitting at home doing what?
Oh, well, you can't get away from that. Human capital never rests. So what we find a lot of times in terms of the HR piece is one, making the rules for telework. One thing I did, I will say, when I, still working for the state of Georgia, they had started outlining teleworking guidelines long before we got to the pandemic. So the good thing was we already had the groundwork. The thing was now we had to like line that up and then, flesh it out a good bit. So with the HR piece, what we're doing is finding out what works in terms of how many days people need to be in teleworking. Are the people that we're allowing to telework, are there reasons or circumstances where they need to come into the office? Because of course we want to make sure there's less exposure as possible. So that's part of it. So in my case, I'm able to telework most of the week and then come in a couple of days a week to do those things that you got to have hands on. So those are the guidelines that we're dealing with, as well as the job responsibilities. Are they being handled? Also, what is expected in terms of response? So let's say you get emails. That was something I learned early on. What's the appropriate time to respond to an email if you're teleworking? You get teleworking, you could be having other things going on and you're still at home and you still need to be able to plug in, make sure you're responding to emails in a timely fashion, making sure that, any things that are pending are being handled, the good thing about that. So, and also, just from what we've said in the past, we just got to be mindful of not being distracted and being in a position where we're doing other things while we're at home. It's like, okay, let me go check my email, kind of make that a regular, because again, when we talk about the woman in the workplace, it's our thing. We're trying to juggle all these things and we have to get that work-life balance. So that's where the goal is to make sure that while we're allowing for teleworking at home, that we're getting the responses we need back in terms of wherever those positions are. Are they responding? Are they making sure the work's getting done? Will we need to increase the days they come into the physical office? And at the same time, the balance being, we don't also want to be responsible. I know for the state of Georgia, we don't like overtime at all. So we don't like to have to give it.
Okay, and that leads me to a question. Mm-hmm. A lot of work, outside of say factories, other companies. So what, people are now they're pretty much, you clock in online, you clock out.
Right.
Well, you just leave the clock running.
Well, so I'll say, like in my case where I'm at, I have a laptop. So at any point in time, if they really want to run a list of what was going on, they can see where I checked in, where I checked out, if I've been answering emails, things of that nature. So that's always been the case. I mean, we still live in the age of Big Brother. There's nothing that you do on someone else's equipment that cannot be tracked. So you got to always keep that in mind, no matter what you're doing, that you can always be tracked if you're working on their computer or you're working on yours in their network. So that's always your VPN, wherever it is that you all use to connect, they can still track you. So the hope is doing the right thing. Also, in terms of just, again, getting the job done, some positions, what we found was some of those positions didn't require, they did require you to be there, to be looking, logging, and being vigilant, but they didn't always require you to, be doing widgets. So just making sure that stuff gets done. If we have access to those databases that you need, and then you making sure that you're using them appropriately. So a lot of it has to be kind of on an honor system. Some obviously are more strict than others, but that's the extra cost that you're going to incur just to have that. So a lot of it's on the honor system. And what I found, obviously, is they've been selective of who's been allowed to telework. So most people, if they've already had a general good work idea and all that, the ethic's been there, they're not giving a big whoop about making sure that everything else is done. So, but I have seen a couple of occasions where some people who may have not been busy when they should have been when they were in the office may have had some more restrictions on them for the teleworking piece. So it's been more case by case.
Well, that's good. And, for many people have kind of said that the pandemic, it just really kind of fast forwarded it, a lot of things. And like you said, we probably about 10, 20 years ago, we
Right.
began working on the telecommuting and then the teleworking, and we were trying to figure out what we were going to even call it. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit and everybody had to stay home and it became remote work.
Exactly.
So sometimes you have to be, mankind, I wrote a piece on it years ago about standing on the precipice, and mankind does not change until he's standing on the edge and the rocks are falling off and he's staring down into the abyss about to be pushed over. And that's when he said, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I think I better change now, because if I don't, I'm going to fall off. I'm going to fall into this abyss.
Exactly.
And that's really what happened. When we were pushed to the edge, we're standing on that precipice, and the pandemic pushed us to that edge. And that's when we have, made that change. And, speaking of those different changes that come into play, obviously here, with the United Nations, the whole reason the United Nations Women, one of our primary concepts, for convening the Commission on the Status of Women, one of the very first things that we actually dealt with at the very first commissioning, and we continue to deal with that, as we go through, and we will deal with this issue that you see before you there until it no longer exists, until it is something that becomes a non-issue. So in the HR industry, you've kind of shared with us, some of the things that, where there are, equalities, and then in some of the ways there are inequalities. How going forward, now that we've kind of leveled some of those playing fields, we're at home, where, the bulk of the people are at home, and probably I can only imagine that is, say, within the next 5 to 6 years, more people will be able to come home, and work from home or what have you. Where do you see this going as far as it fits into equality in this particular industry?
Okay. Well, I mean, the hope is that now that we've been in a position where we've got to see exactly who fits where, that we'll see more equality in this industry, more so, just in that we all know some places have managed to stay open, but maybe have downsized. So in typical standards, some things may be combined or, consolidated to be more efficient. I would suspect that, without trying to be gender biased, that women will definitely increase in terms of their ability to handle the higher levels, more so just because if they start consolidating those things, and let's say people move out or retire, we did have quite a few people to do that in our agency. After a certain period of time, they were close to retirement age, and it's like, this might as well be a good time as any to consolidate those things that HR may have similar, because they do tend to have most of the time when you are in an HR position, you run the gamut in terms of things that you will do. So rather than trying to get it all in separate pieces in the buckets, I think a lot of that will be consolidated. And I think a lot of that will pull in a lot more women in terms of leadership in HR, because we've proven over and over again on the other levels that we can handle multiple tasks, different types of tasks, and still remain in touch with the people that we need to let them know this is what's going on, this is how it's going to happen. So I do see that increasing, because we've already demonstrated the ability to do that, and we don't need the title just to get the job done. So I sense that'll be happening. I can't give you numbers, but I can say that is pretty much what's going to happen over time.
Okay, and I can see that. I can see that, because really what I believe you're absolutely right, in that assessment, in the fact that what's going to happen going forward, not only here in the United States, but throughout the world, and that is getting the job done. Just as we saw many of the women and the women leaders, and how well that they were able to, keep their country, the balance of their countries, and keep the, kind of pull the country together to make people feel that they were safe, that everything was going to be okay, that we were going to get through this. And it was those countries that were headed by women that reported that they felt, the safest, and that, things were in order, and they did exactly what they were told. And some of them even came out of this, or coming through this, with zero or two, a few hundred even cases, of this, because of the fact of how things were run, or the cases were considered, like in the city of Chicago, the cases, high as they were much lower considering the number of people that are in that city. Right. And so therefore, when you look at the per capita numbers, their number is very, very low, as compared to, other areas run by men. And like you said, women just have that sensibilities. They have that logic. They can handle logic, and they can have creativity, and that sense of care and nurturing at the same time. Right. So with that, are there any other little golden nuggets you might want to leave, with our audience, just to, on this issue, as they kind of go forward out there?
Well, again, as I said, this is a prime time for female entrepreneurs to take advantage of this. Again, we've in our case, we had a lot of people who've retired, and a lot of consolidation has gone on. And some of these departments and things, they're going to need that consultant, that outside person that can come in and fill in the gaps where they don't have it. So again, get yourself very versed in all of those hot topics that would be occurring with the HR piece. Like I said, the FMLA. Most people don't know last year that for a very brief moment in time, from April through December, we had an actual act that helped those who were stricken by the pandemic for 2020, in terms of extended FMLA leave, in terms of those things with regards to whether they were full-time or part-time. This is something that, they decided they declined to do it again this year, but maybe if we had more advocates, more consultants, more people versed in these areas, we could have made a demand saying you need to extend that into 2021 and 2022. So again, becoming versed in these areas are going to be a phenomenal way for you to break in and do those things as an entrepreneur for these companies who are now maybe downsizing and are not wanting to use as many people, but still need the expertise. So you can, again, make the world your pearl by being able to be versed in the FMLA laws and finding out what's going on with regards to how sick leave is handled and things of that nature. That, the world is open. So
okay. Well, yeah, that's it. Well, I thank you for that. I thank you for your time. And that's the time we have for today. And we appreciate Nikki Dorsey coming on with us and helping us to take a better look at our goal number 8. And that is our topic of women in the workplace. So thank you so much, and have a great day.